Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And, today we are tackling something that I think a lot of homeowners struggle with, and that's figuring out what to do with your deck. Should you repair it or just go all out and replace the thing?
Yeah, it's such a common question. And, you think it would be straightforward, but there are a lot of different things that you need to think about before you make that decision.
Absolutely. So we've actually got some great advice from Green Exterior Remodeling to guide us through this process and kind of help us break down all those different factors to consider. So let's jump right in. I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is like, okay, you're standing there, you're looking at your deck, trying to decide repair or replace. Like, where do we even start?
Well, the very first thing I would do is just, walk around on it a little bit, see how stable it feels.
Yeah.
Do you feel any kind of sponginess or sinking as you're walking around?
Oh, that's a good point. Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear sign that, the foundation might be compromised, and that's a big red flag that you're probably going to need a full replacement.
Okay, so spongy deck equals bad news. Got it. But what if things feel relatively solid? Maybe there are a few problem areas here and there. The source material mentions something called minor structural damage. What exactly does that mean? Like, what would that look like in the real world?
Yeah, so think of it as like those early warning signs, right? So maybe you've got a couple of boards that are starting to rot, or, a railing that's coming loose, or maybe some steps that just feel a little wobbly. Those are all things that can definitely be repaired, but the key is really catching them early before they turn into much bigger issues.
Right, that makes sense. I guess it's kind of like, with anything else, the sooner you address it, the better. So you're not letting those small problems fester and turn into huge headaches down the line.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, they kind of put off those little repairs and then all of a sudden, it's a much bigger project than they anticipated.
So vigilance is key when it comes to deck maintenance. I'm getting that message loud and clear. But how do we know when, simple repairs can be enough versus when we're just, delaying the inevitable?
Right.
Like, at what point do we say, okay, it's time to just bite the bullet and get a whole new deck?
That's a great question. And, it's tough to give a hard and fast rule because every situation is different. But Green Exterior Remodeling actually has a pretty useful guideline. They say that if your repair costs are starting to add up to, more than half the price of a new deck, then you really need to start seriously considering a full replacement.
Oh, that's a really good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
I like that a lot because it gives you kind of a concrete way to think about it,
Yeah.
instead of just sort of guessing or, feeling like you're throwing good money after bad.
Right, exactly. It helps you make a more objective decision based on, the actual numbers and the long-term costs involved.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook, right? They just focus on that initial repair cost and they don't think about, okay, well, what if I have to keep doing this over and over again? Is it really worth it in the long run?
Yeah, and a new deck might seem like a much bigger expense up front, but when you factor in those potential ongoing repair costs, it might actually end up being the more cost-effective option in the long term.
Okay, so we're talking about long-term costs and benefits here, but I'm curious, what are some of the things that can really drive up those repair costs, beyond just replacing a few boards here and there?
Yeah, so one factor that often gets overlooked is the type of material your deck is made from. Older decks are typically built with pressure-treated wood, which
Hmm.
is, it's affordable, but it requires a lot of upkeep.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Right.
I've got a pressure-treated wood deck, and it feels like I'm constantly staining and sealing and power washing. It's a never-ending battle against the elements.
Exactly. And if you skip those maintenance tasks, even for a year or two, things can deteriorate really quickly, and then you're looking at much more extensive and costly repairs down the road.
Oh, yeah. You start getting rot and, all kinds of other problems cropping up. It can get out of hand really fast.
And if the damage is bad enough, you might even end up having to replace entire sections of the deck, which, that can really eat into your budget.
Right. So those seemingly small maintenance tasks
Yeah,
can actually make a huge difference in the long run and potentially save you a lot of money down the line.
absolutely. It's all about prevention and being proactive rather than reactive when it comes to your deck.
Okay, so we've talked about pressure-treated wood and the importance of maintenance. But the source material also mentioned newer composite materials as an alternative. What's the appeal there, and how do they compare in terms of cost and upkeep?
Yeah, so composite materials are really gaining popularity, and for good reason. They're engineered to be much more durable and low maintenance.
Hmm?
They resist rot fading scratches, so you're not constantly fighting against the elements like you are with wood.
Oh, that sounds like a dream come true. I hate that yearly chore of staining my deck.
I know, right? It's a huge time saver. And, it can save you money in the long run, too, because you're not constantly buying those, staining supplies and sealers and all that.
Right. So it sounds like you're kind of trading a bit of upfront cost for long-term peace of mind. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Composite decks might cost a bit more initially, but you're saving time and money on maintenance, and you get that peace of mind knowing that your deck is going to look good and perform well for years to come.
That's a compelling argument for sure. And I know a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, okay, well, how much more expensive are we talking about here? What's the actual cost difference between pressure-treated wood and composite?
Yeah, so Green Exterior Remodeling actually gave us some helpful ballpark figures. They said that, a basic pressure-treated wood deck might start around, let's say, $5,000, whereas a comparable composite deck could run you closer to, maybe $8,000 or $9,000.
Okay, so it's not an insignificant difference, but it's also not, an astronomical leap either.
Right. And again, you have to factor in those long-term maintenance costs. With a composite deck, you're not going to be spending hundreds of dollars every year on staining and sealing and all that jazz.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about the initial price tag. It's about that total cost of ownership over the lifespan of the deck.
Exactly. And I think when you look at it that way, composite materials often start to look a lot more appealing, especially for people who, value their time and want a low maintenance outdoor space.
Yeah, I can definitely see the appeal there. And it sounds like composite decks are becoming increasingly popular these days.
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely a hot trend right now. And I think that trend is only going to continue as more and more homeowners discover the benefits of these, durable and low maintenance materials.
So if you're thinking about building a new deck or even just replacing an old one, composite materials are definitely something to consider.
For sure. And, it's always a good idea to do your research, talk to a reputable contractor, get some quotes, and really weigh your options before making a decision.
Absolutely. And speaking of reputable contractors, we should probably mention that Green Exterior Remodeling specializes in building these beautiful composite decks, right?
Yes, they do. And they have a fantastic reputation in the Charlotte, North Carolina area for their craftsmanship and their customer service.
So if you're in the Charlotte area and you're thinking about a new deck, they would definitely be worth checking out.
For sure. And even if you're not in Charlotte,
Okay.
They can be a great resource for information and inspiration. Their website has tons of photos and videos of their work, and they also have a blog with lots of helpful articles and tips on deck design and maintenance.
Well, that's great to know because, even if you're not working with them directly, you can still learn a lot from their expertise.
Exactly. And I think that's really important, to empower yourself with knowledge before making any big decisions about your home.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power when it comes to home improvement. There's no doubt about it.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about those situations where a full deck replacement really is the best option. We touched on the spongy deck scenario earlier, but what are some other red flags that might indicate it's time to say goodbye to the old deck and start fresh?
Yeah, so aside from that foundational instability, there are a few other key things to look out for. One is extensive rot or decay.
Yeah.
If you're seeing that in multiple areas of the deck, that's a sign that the structural integrity is compromised, and it's probably not worth trying to salvage.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense because, even if you replace those rotten boards, the underlying structure might still be weakened, and that could lead to bigger problems down the road.
Exactly. It's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a broken bone. You need to address the root of the problem, not just the symptoms.
Right, and sometimes the root of the problem is just that the deck is old and it's reached the end of its lifespan.
Yeah.
Things wear out eventually, and there's no shame in acknowledging that and moving on to something new and improved.
Absolutely. And, sometimes a replacement is just the best way to ensure your safety and peace of mind.
Yeah.
You don't want to be constantly worrying about whether your deck is going to hold up or, if it's going to collapse under you.
That's a good point. Nobody wants to be living in fear of their own deck.
Exactly. So if you're seeing those major red flags, extensive rot instability safety concerns, it's probably time to start thinking about a replacement.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the structural warning signs. But what about the aesthetics? Sometimes a deck might be structurally sound, but it's just plain ugly.
Mm-mm.
It's faded, it's splintered, it's an eyesore. What do you do in those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, aesthetics are important too, right? You want your deck to be a place where you can relax and enjoy yourself, not cringe every time you look at it. So if your deck is, structurally sound, but it's just not visually appealing, there are definitely some things you can do to spruce it up.
Okay, so give us some tips. What are our options for giving an old deck a facelift?
Well, the first thing I would do is give it a good cleaning.
Right.
Power wash it, get all that dirt and grime off, and see what you're working with.
Yeah, that's a good starting point because sometimes just a good cleaning can make a world of difference.
Exactly. And once it's clean, you can start to think about, some cosmetic upgrades. Like maybe you want to replace those old splintered boards with new ones or, give it a fresh coat of stain or paint.
Oh yeah, a fresh coat of stain can really transform the look of a deck.
Absolutely. And you can even get creative with, different colors and patterns. Maybe you want to do a two-tone stain or, add some decorative elements like stencils or, even just some potted plants.
Right, so there's a lot you can do to improve the aesthetics without necessarily having to do a full replacement.
Exactly. And those cosmetic upgrades can be a really cost-effective way to give your deck a new lease on life.
That's great advice. And it's good to know that we have options. Even if our decks aren't falling apart, we can still, make them look and feel more inviting.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. Your deck should be an extension of your home. It should be a place where you can relax and entertain and enjoy the outdoors.
So it's worth putting in a little effort to make it a space that you truly love.
Absolutely well said.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of different factors to consider when deciding whether to repair or replace your deck. But is there anything else we should keep in mind as we're going through this process?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that every deck is unique and every homeowner's needs are different. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this question.
Right. It's not like there's a magic formula that you can plug in and it'll tell you exactly what to do.
Exactly. You really need to take the time to assess your own deck, your budget, your lifestyle, and your long-term goals for your outdoor space.
So it's all about gathering information, weighing your options, and making an informed decision that's right for you.
Absolutely. And, don't be afraid to ask questions. Talk to a reputable contractor, get multiple quotes, and really do your research before making a decision.
That's great advice. And I think it's a good reminder that, it's okay to take your time with this process. There's no need to rush into anything.
Exactly. And, if you're not sure what to do, it's always a good idea to get a professional assessment. A reputable contractor can come out, take a look at your deck, and give you their expert opinion on whether it's worth repairing or if it's time for a replacement.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's probably a good place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here, but we've still got more to explore. So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve into some more specific tips and strategies for both repairing and replacing your deck. Welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into the world of decks repair versus replace. It's a tough decision, but we're here to help you navigate it all.
That's right. And we're really getting into the nitty-gritty today.
Exactly. We're going beyond just those initial, visual inspections and really diving deep into the factors that can influence your decision. So let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about the importance of considering the long-term costs and benefits of both repair and replacement.
Absolutely. And, one of the key things to keep in mind is that those costs can really vary depending on the specific issues you're facing. A few loose boards is obviously a much simpler and cheaper fix than, say, a major structural problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it can get really tricky for homeowners, right? Because, you might be tempted to just keep patching things up, thinking you're saving money. But if you're not careful, those little repairs can start to add up really quickly.
Right. And that's why it's so important to get a professional assessment. A reputable contractor can come out, take a look at your deck, and give you a realistic idea of what those repair costs are likely to be.
So don't just try to DIY it.
Yeah.
Get an expert opinion, especially if you're dealing with anything beyond just those basic surface level issues.
Exactly. And I think a lot of homeowners are surprised by how affordable those professional assessments can be. It's a relatively small investment that
Mm.
can potentially save you a lot of money and headaches down the road.
That's a really good point.
Hmm.
I think people often assume that, calling a contractor is going to be this huge expense, but it doesn't have to be.
Not at all. And in many cases, those contractors offer free consultations or, very affordable assessments. So it's
Mm.
definitely worth reaching out and getting that expert opinion.
Absolutely. And I think having that professional perspective can also help you make a more informed decision about whether repair or replacement is truly the best option. They can kind of give you that objective, unbiased advice that you might not be able to get on your own.
Right, exactly. They can look at the situation with a fresh set of eyes and, they have that experience dealing with all sorts of different deck problems. So they can really give you a sense of what's realistic and what's not.
So it's kind of like having a deck doctor. They can diagnose the problem and recommend the best course of treatment.
I love that analogy. That's perfect.
So let's talk about some of those potential treatments. We touched on some of the common repair scenarios in the last part, but let's dive a little deeper. What are some of the specific things that a contractor might recommend for repairing a deck?
Yeah, so it really depends on the nature of the problem. If it's just a few loose boards, they might simply need to be resecured, maybe with some new screws or nails, or if there's some minor rot, they might be able to cut out those affected areas and replace them with new wood.
Okay, so those are some of the simpler fixes. What about more extensive repairs? What if there's significant damage to the structure of the deck?
Yeah, so in those cases, they might need to reinforce the joists or beams. Those are the structural supports that hold up the deck. Or they might need to replace entire sections of the decking or railing, if the damage is widespread.
So those are obviously going to be more involved and more expensive repairs.
Right, exactly. And that's where that rule of thumb we talked about earlier comes into play. If those repair costs are starting to exceed, 50% of the cost of a new deck, then it might be time to start seriously considering a full replacement.
Right, because at that point, you're really kind of throwing good money after bad.
Exactly. And, even if you do those extensive repairs, there's no guarantee that you're not going to run into more problems down the road.
So it's kind of like you're buying yourself a little more time, but you're not really addressing the underlying issue.
Right. And that's why it's so important to think about the long term. Are you really comfortable with the idea of continuing to pour money into an aging deck? Or would you rather just, start fresh with a new one that's going to give you peace of mind for years to come?
That's a really good point. I think a lot of homeowners get stuck in that cycle of just, fixing things as they break, and they don't really stop to consider whether it might be more cost effective in the long run to just, bite the bullet and replace the whole thing.
Right, exactly. And, sometimes a replacement is just the best way to ensure your safety and your peace of mind. You don't want to be constantly worrying about whether your deck is going to hold up or, if it's going to collapse under you.
Absolutely. And I think there's also that emotional aspect to it. A new deck can really revitalize your outdoor space and make it feel like a brand new part of your home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I think a lot of people underestimate. They focus on the practical aspects, but they forget about that emotional element.
Yeah. All right, it's not just about functionality. It's about creating a space that you love and that brings you joy.
Exactly. And I think when you factor in that emotional component, a replacement can start to look even more appealing.
So it's not just about the numbers. It's about how you want to feel in your outdoor space.
Absolutely. Well said.
So let's say you've done your due diligence, you've gotten a professional assessment, you've weighed the costs and benefits, and you've decided that a full replacement is the way to go. What are the next steps? Where do you even begin with this process?
Well, the first and most important step is to find a reputable contractor, someone who specializes in deck building and has a proven track record of quality work.
So this is where, doing your research and getting referrals comes in handy.
Absolutely. You want to make sure you're working with someone you trust and who's going to do the job right.
And I think it's also important to find a contractor who's a good fit for your personality and your communication style. You're going to be working with this person pretty closely. So you want to make sure you feel comfortable communicating with them and that you're on the same page.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. You want to have that good rapport with your contractor.
So once you've found a few potential contractors, what are some of the questions you should be asking them to help you narrow down your choices?
Yeah, so I would start by asking about their experience. How long have they been building decks? What kind of materials do they specialize in? Do they have any certifications or awards?
Right. You want to make sure they have the expertise and the credentials to do a quality job.
Exactly. And I would also ask to see examples of their previous work, photos or videos of decks they've built in the past.
Oh, yeah. That's a great way to get a sense of their style and their craftsmanship.
Absolutely. And you can also ask for references, talk to some of their past clients and see what their experiences were like.
So it's really about doing your due diligence and gathering as much information as you can before making a decision.
Right. And, don't be afraid to ask lots of questions. A good contractor is going to be happy to answer them. They'll be transparent about their process and their pricing.
Absolutely. And you should never feel pressured into signing a contract or making a decision before you're ready.
Exactly. Take your time, do your research, and find a contractor that you feel good about.
So let's talk about the actual design process. Once you've chosen a contractor, what are some of the things you need to consider when designing your new deck?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different factors to think about, the size and shape of the deck, the materials you want to use, the features you want to incorporate, like, built-in seating or lighting or a pergola.
So it's kind of like designing an outdoor room. You want to think about how you're going to use the space and what kind of atmosphere you want to create.
Exactly. And I think it's really helpful to have some inspiration photos or ideas. You can browse websites like Pinterest or Hers, or even just look at decks in your neighborhood to get some ideas.
And I know a lot of contractors also have portfolios of their work that you could look through.
Right. And they can also help you with the design process. They can come up with a custom design that fits your needs, your budget, and your style.
So you don't have to be an expert in deck design.
Hmm.
You can rely on the contractor's expertise to guide you through the process.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to have that collaboration, between the homeowner and the contractor to ensure that the final product is something that everyone's happy with.
Right. You want to make sure you're on the same page
Yeah.
and that you have a shared vision for the project.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the keys to a successful deck building experience.
So we've talked about finding a contractor, designing the deck. What about the actual construction process? What can homeowners expect during that phase?
Yeah, so typically the contractor will start by obtaining any necessary permits. Depending on where you live, you might need permits for things like electrical work or structural changes.
Okay, so that's the first step, permitting, and then what?
And then they'll start with the demolition if you're replacing an existing deck. They'll need to tear down the old one first, and then they'll start building the new one from the ground up, starting with the foundation and then the framing and then the decking and railing.
So it's a pretty involved process.
It is, but a good contractor is going to keep you informed every step of the way, and they'll make sure that the project stays on schedule and within budget.
So communication is key throughout the entire process.
Absolutely. You should feel comfortable reaching out to your contractor with any questions or concerns, and they should be responsive and keep you updated on the progress.
Right. You want to feel like you're part of the team.
Yeah.
Not just like you're handing over a check and then crossing your fingers hoping for the best.
Exactly. It's a collaborative effort, and I think when you have that good communication, that trust between the homeowner and the contractor, that's when you get the best results.
Absolutely. So let's talk about timelines.
Yeah.
How long does it typically take to build a new deck?
Yeah, so that can vary depending on the size and complexity of the deck, but, on average, you're probably looking at anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months.
Okay, so it's not a quick overnight project.
Not usually. It's a significant undertaking, but, the end result is worth it. You get this beautiful new outdoor space that you can enjoy for years to come.
And I think it's important to remember that, even though it's a construction project, it doesn't have to be a completely disruptive experience.
Yeah.
A good contractor is going to make sure that they minimize the impact on your daily life, and they'll clean up after themselves every day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They should treat your property with respect, and they should make sure that the construction process is as smooth and as painless as possible.
So it's not like you're going to be living in a construction zone for months on end.
Not at all. It should be a relatively manageable process, and, the end result is worth it.
Absolutely well said. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here in part two. We've talked about everything from professional assessments to repair strategies to the design and construction process. And I think we've given our listeners a really good foundation for making that all-important decision between repair and replacement.
Yeah, I think so too. We've really tried to cover all the bases and give people the information they need to make an informed decision.
So stay tuned for part three, where we'll delve into some more specific tips and considerations for choosing the right materials for your deck and creating a space that truly reflects your style and your needs. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on all things decks repair versus replace. We've covered a lot of ground so far, but now it's time to talk about one of the most exciting aspects of this whole process, and that's choosing the right materials for your new deck.
Yeah, that's where the fun really starts. You get to unleash your creativity and create a space that truly reflects your style and your vision.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the world of deck materials. What are some of the most popular options out there, and what are the pros and cons of each?
Okay, so as we've mentioned before, pressure-treated wood is kind of the classic go-to material for decks. It's affordable, it's readily available, and it's relatively easy to work with.
Right, and I think a lot of people appreciate that sort of natural look and feel of wood.
Absolutely. And, it can be stained or painted to match any style, but of course there are some downsides to pressure-treated wood. It requires regular maintenance to prevent rot and decay,
Hmm.
and it can be prone to splintering and warping over time.
Yeah, and that maintenance can be a real chore.
Yeah.
Staining and sealing every year. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
Right, exactly. So that's where composite materials come in. They're engineered to be much more durable and low maintenance. They resist rot, fading scratches, so you don't have to worry about all that upkeep.
And we've talked about composite decking before, but just to recap, what exactly are they made of?
Yeah, so composite decking is typically made from a blend of wood fibers and plastic. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the look and feel of wood, but with the durability and longevity of plastic.
And there are so many different composite decking options on the market these days.
Hmm.
You can find everything from, basic planks to more elaborate designs with, different colors and textures and patterns.
Yeah, it's amazing how far composite decking has come. It used to be that you were kind of limited in terms of style, but now there's so many options to choose from. You can really create a unique and personalized look.
So it's not just about, that sort of plain brown composite deck anymore.
Yeah.
You can really get creative.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why composite decking has become so popular. People are realizing that they don't have to sacrifice style for durability.
Right, you can have both, and that's a beautiful thing.
Exactly. So if you're looking for a low maintenance and stylish option,
Hmm.
composite decking is definitely worth considering.
Now, we've talked about pressure-treated wood and composite decking, but what about other materials? Are there any other alternatives that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there are a few other options out there. Aluminum decking is becoming increasingly popular. It's very durable, it's fire resistant, and it's also recyclable.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard much about aluminum decking.
Yeah, it's a relatively new option, but it's gaining traction, especially in areas that are prone to wildfires.
Right, that makes sense. And what about the aesthetics of aluminum decking? Does it look like, industrial, or is it more, homey?
Well, it depends on the style you choose. There are some aluminum decking options that have that sort of sleek, modern look, but there are also some that are designed to mimic the look of wood.
So you have some versatility there.
Yeah, absolutely. And another option is PVC decking. That's similar to composite decking, but it's made entirely of plastic, so it's even more resistant to moisture and insects.
So PVC is kind of like the ultimate low-maintenance option.
Yeah, pretty much. You really don't have to do anything. It's just going to look good and perform well for years to come.
Now, I know some people are hesitant about using plastic materials because of environmental concerns. Are there any eco-friendly decking options out there?
Yeah, there are definitely some sustainable options. Some composite decking manufacturers use recycled materials in their products, and there are also some decking options made from reclaimed wood.
Oh, that's great. So you could have a beautiful deck and feel good about your environmental impact.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that's becoming increasingly important to homeowners. They want to make choices that are good for the planet as well as their own lifestyle.
Right. It's about that holistic approach,
Yeah.
thinking about the bigger picture.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to ask your contractor about eco-friendly decking options. They should be able to point you in the right direction.
So we've talked about the different types of decking materials. But what about railings? That's another important element of the deck design.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The railing can really make or break the look of your deck, and it's also a crucial safety feature.
Right. You want to make sure it's sturdy and secure.
Exactly. So there are a lot of different railing options out there. You can go with classic wood railings, or you can choose something more modern like metal or cable railings.
And there are also some really creative railing designs out there.
Yeah.
You can use different materials and patterns to create a unique and eye-catching look.
Yeah, you can really get creative with railings, and I think it's a fun way to add some personality to your deck.
So don't be afraid to think outside the box when it comes to railings.
Absolutely. And, if you're not sure what style to choose, your contractor can help you come up with some ideas.
Right. They're the experts, after all.
Exactly. So let's talk about some other design considerations, beyond just the materials. What are some things that homeowners should keep in mind when planning their new deck?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is to think about how you're actually going to use the space.
Mm.
Is it primarily for dining? Is it for lounging? Is it for entertaining? How many people do you typically have over a?
Right. You want to make sure that the deck is sized appropriately for your needs.
Mhm.
You don't want it to be too small and cramped, but you also don't want it to be so big that it feels empty and uninviting.
And I think it's also important to consider the flow of traffic.
Yeah.
How people are going to move around on the deck. How are they going to access it from the house?
Yeah, you want to make sure that there's a clear path, from the door to the seating area to the grill to the, whatever other features you have on the deck.
And I think it's also helpful to think about the view. If you
Mm.
have a beautiful backyard, you want to make sure that the deck is positioned in a way that takes advantage of that view.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you can even use the railing design to enhance the view.
Hmm.
You can choose a railing style that's more open and airy so it doesn't obstruct the view.
Right, so there are a lot of different things to consider, but it's all about creating a space that's both functional and beautiful.
Exactly. Well said. And, don't be afraid to get creative.
Right.
There are no rules when it comes to deck design. You can really make it your own.
And I think that's what makes it so exciting. You have this blank canvas and you can create something truly unique and special.
Absolutely. And, it's a great way to add value to your home and enhance your outdoor living space.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive on deck repair versus replace. We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
from assessing your deck's condition to choosing the right materials to designing and building your dream outdoor space.
Yeah, we've really tried to give you a comprehensive overview of everything you need to know to make an informed decision.
And remember, there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to repair versus replace. It's all about what's best for your individual needs and your budget.
Absolutely. And, don't be afraid to ask for help, talk to a reputable contractor, get some quotes, and really weigh your options before making a decision.
Well said. And if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, we highly recommend checking out Green Exterior Remodeling. They're a fantastic company with a great reputation for quality craftsmanship and customer service.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who aren't in the Charlotte area, the principles we've discussed today apply no matter where you live. So take the time to do your research and find a contractor that you trust.
And remember, your deck should be a place where you can relax, entertain, and enjoy the outdoors. So make it a space that you truly love.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.